Read from the 17th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." This is the gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. So we had these verses and this story not all that many months ago, and in that sermon that I preached that day, I described in detail for you the disease that in the time of Jesus they called elephantiasis. It was about the most hideous and horrible thing that could happen to a person. I looked up the disease in a medical book, and here's how the medical book defines it. It's a chronic communicable disease caused by Mycobacterium lepra, characterized by the production of granulomatous lesions of the skin, mucous membranes, and peripheral nervous system. That's kind of lofty, huh? Most people just say it's leprosy. The bottom line is if you had it in the time of Jesus, you were written off. You were considered good as dead. You were a goner. Well, tragically, it was a disease that was very common in the time of Jesus. Just as bad as having the disease was living with the stigma of it and the humbling nature of it, and the fact that there was no part of it that was fun or good, or there was shame. There was great shame in having the disease. In fact, if you had it, the law said that you had to completely stay away from your family. Not only because you were highly contagious, but also, just to be perfectly blunt with you, you stunk to high heaven. So if someone came within 50 yards of you, that was the law. You had to shout at the top of your lungs, "Unclean! Unclean!" So people would know who you were and what you had. Less than human is what you were. People spent their days and their nights praying that they would not be like you. Those who had leprosy said it would be better to die than to go through the humiliation and isolation and suffering of that disease. So that's the context of the lesson. And it was into that setting that Jesus walked one day. And as he did, he stirred up all kinds of emotions and feelings. And I want you to listen to one more time how Luke describes it. Luke writes, as Jesus was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance, 50 yards, and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." I'm not sure it's even possible to imagine what it would be like first to watch sores develop on your skin, and then eventually over a period of time to watch your fingers and toes and limbs start to wither and then eventually fall off. Some people lived with that disease for 30 years or more. Imagine their desperation then and their sense of complete hopelessness as they watched this happen to them over a long period of time, and then Jesus comes along. The one and only person in all of creation who with a single word, maybe without even saying a word, he had the power to completely take it away. Luke's telling of it probably doesn't even come close to capturing what it must have been like that day when they yelled for all they were worth, "Jesus, please don't leave us, please don't walk away, please, here we are, heal us." We can only imagine what that scene must have been like. The story says that Jesus made the impossible happen. Incredibly, he cured their elephantiasis. Fully and completely, he healed them. He took away every sore. He restored every limb. And again, I don't think it's even possible to imagine what that must have been like as people watched their sores disappear and their limbs reappear. Really? Wow! How excited and amazed and overwhelmed they must have been. But here's the one thing about this story that never ceases to astound me. Only one of them, only one, went back to say thank you. 9 out of 10 didn't go back. Now, wouldn't you think that each and every one of those astounded people would take time at least to go back to the one who miraculously cured them and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. But they didn't. At least 9 of them didn't. And that thought completely dumbfounds me. Then again, isn't it true that each and every day Jesus does something wonderful and amazing in our lives? But do I take time to say a heartfelt and deeply sincere thank you? Do I take time in my day to pause and say, Jesus, thank you? Sometimes. But if I'm perfectly honest, not anywhere near as I should. Is it just me, or does it seem like we as a society have increasingly forgotten how to say please and thank you, and to be kind? Instead of recognizing the kindness of other people and treating other people with respect, we take things for granted. We make demands of people. We focus on our complaints rather than our blessings. We do it in our faith life. We take God for granted. We even get angry at God when we think that we get something we don't deserve, or we don't get something that we do deserve, and we say, God, why'd you do this? Maybe we need to recapture that sense of thank you and please. Today is the last in a series of 6 sermons on the topic, being people of Christ. My message today is really a very simple one. To be a healthy congregation, we need to be less like the 9 who never took time to return to Jesus to give thanks. And instead, we need to be more like the 1 who did return. As people of Christ, we need to be returners. It wasn't that long ago, I was at the grocery store here in town. I had just a few items in my hand, so I went to the express lane, and as it turns out, I was behind a man who had 1 item. So I thought, well, this will be fast. And he put his item on the counter, and as the checker scanned for the price, he blurted out, "You got any can openers in this store?" "Yes, sir," the clerk said. "They're over on aisle," whatever the aisle was, I don't remember. "Go get it for me," he said. I really felt bad for the checker. The way that the guy was saying it was clearly not very respectful, and I could tell that the cashier wasn't happy about being treated that way, but I also admired her for not making a big issue of it. She just figured, rather than argue with the guy, I'm just going to go get the can opener. And so she locked the till, and she went off to get the can opener, and almost immediately now, people were starting to get in line behind me, and they started mumbling and grumbling, and one person started cussing, and another person started making snarky remarks toward the man, and another person switched over lines and started taking their grumbly attitude. And when the checker finally came back with the can opener, the guy never thanked her, but instead he started arguing about the price of the other item that he had just put on the counter. "I know that's not the right price," he said. And she said, "Well, sir, I guarantee you that is the right price." "Well, I want somebody to come over and check it." So somebody else had to come over, and they had to go do a price check, and it held up the line even longer. And when the price check came back exactly as the checker had said the price was the first time, the man grumbled again, "This stupid store, I can't believe that you charge way more than you should charge for these things." And blah, 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 blah. As I was leaving the store that day, I thought about how many people left and were leaving with grumpy attitudes simply because this guy chose to act the way he chose to act. How difficult would it have been for him to say please and thank you and to treat someone with a little bit of courtesy? What we say to others and the way that we treat them has an enormous, enormous impact on people. By way of contrast, I want you to listen to this story. One day a few years ago, a short, thin, hunched-over older man came into the church office carrying a plastic bag, and it was stuffed with vegetables. He was dressed in very ragged clothing, and he had absolutely no teeth in his mouth. And he asked, "Can you spare a little change to buy some of these?" And with that, he spread his vegetables out over the counter. Well, those of us who were there that morning felt sorry for him. He seemed like he really did have next to nothing. And so we dug into our pockets and our purses and our billfolds and whatnot. We came up with some money, and we bought a few of his vegetables. And he smiled his toothless grin, and he said, "Thank you so much." And he went on his way. A couple weeks later, this man came back with another sack. He says, "You want to buy more vegetables?" And he again put his vegetables out on the counter. This time, in addition to the ragged old clothes he was wearing, now he also smelled awful. And again, we felt horrible for him. We just knew that he didn't have much and probably didn't have access to a shower. And we gave him a few dollars for his vegetables, and he went on his way. And we started to wonder, is this going to be an every other week ritual? And sure enough, a couple weeks after that, he came back again. And this time it was cold outside, and the man didn't have any kind of a jacket or coat on. And he was clearly shivering. And we noticed that day that not only were his shoes almost completely worn out, but he was wearing two left shoes, not even the same shoe, mismatched. More than ever, we realized that he really didn't have much of anything but what he was wearing. And so we bought some vegetables again. But when he left, this time we decided that we were going to concoct a scheme to get him some new clothes. So we gathered up some money, and a couple of us went to the local Walmart store, and we bought some pants and shirts and shoes and socks and underwear and a jacket and some toothpaste and some soap and that kind of thing. And we put all of it in 2 sacks. And the next time the man came in, a couple weeks later, we told him a little white lie. We said, "Sir, guess what? Somebody just dropped off these 2 sacks and wondered if we knew of anybody who might be able to use these things. You don't suppose you would be able to use them, do you?" And you know what he said? He got the biggest smile on his face from ear to ear, and this is what he said. He says, "This is so amazing. Just yesterday," he said, "I met a man downtown who told me he didn't have any warm clothes. And he wondered how he might get some warm clothes. And I told him I didn't know, but that I would pray for him. And so last night I prayed that, first of all, I thanked God for what I have. And then I prayed that somebody would come along and give something to that man that would help him stay warm. And guess what? Now here I am in your church, and you have these 2 bags of clothes just for him. I can't believe it's an amazing answer for prayer. I can't wait to go and bring him these 2 bags of clothes." We only saw that man a couple more times. But one of those times he was so excited to tell us about his new friend who loved the 2 bags full of clothes and cosmetic items. When he left the church that day with these bags of clothes in his arms, we couldn't help but ask ourselves, am I as thankful to God for the many things that I do have as he is for the simple things that he has? So today I leave you with this question. Would you say that you have been thankful for the things that you have in your life, simple or otherwise? Have you regularly set aside time to say thank you to God? If the truth were fully told, would you say that you are more like the 9 who never returned to give thanks? Or are you more like the 1 who did return to give thanks? What God has given you is so much greater than coats and shoes and toothpaste and vegetables. What you've been given is life in the face of death. The promise of hope and strength even when it seems there can't possibly be any. The assurance of unconditional love and forgiveness when it's hardly deserved. The promise that God will care for you always and forever, no matter what. All of these things and more are gifts from God daily, hourly, by the minute. In his letter to the Colossian Christians, the Apostle Paul described what you need to do to live a life that honors and pleases God. Brenda read these words a few minutes ago. I read them to you again. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Forgive. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ, rule in your hearts. Since as members of one body, you are called to peace. And he concluded with these words: be thankful. Be thankful. That's the last of the traits that I commend to you as I conclude this series of messages on being people of Christ. Be thankful. Trait number 6. Be thankful. Be a returner. Trait number 5. Remember that you're not so much created to be in the image of God as to be as the image of God. God has no hands and feet except your hands and feet. As St. Francis once said, preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. Find joy in serving. Be people who love to serve. Number 4, be Madison people. Invite people. Don't just be content to tell people about Christ and tell people about your church. Bring them, show them, take them by the hand as Madison did with me that day. Come and see, come and see, come and see. Be inviting people. When I show people this painting and tell them it was done by an 8-year-old girl named Akiana, the first thing they say is, "What? Really? 8 years old?" There's a sense of awe in that. Make time in your life to be a person who stands in reverent awe of the things that God has done for you, which are so much greater than that painting, and that's pretty impressive. Be a person who stands in reverent awe all the time. Second, the turtle on the post didn't get there without help. And we don't get where we are without help. Be humble. Our job is not to be God. Our job is not to judge people, pass judgment on them. Our job is to be humble in our relationships with people, and mostly, as the prophet Micah said, to do what's right, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God. Always remember to be humble. And finally, make Christ number 1 in your life. There's nothing more important than Christ. If you do these 6 things, practice these 6 traits, you will be people of Christ here at Christ Lutheran Church. And you'll be amazed at what can happen here and how you will be blessed, not only to be a vital and healthy and dynamic church into the future, but I'm saying even to grow. 6 traits, being people of Christ. Amen.